In 2001, when I worked at Chester Cathedral, I helped lead a pilgrimage to the Sinai Desert. I'd never been to a true desert before. It held many surprises for me in its beauty, its colors, and its silence. Its silence. That was larger than any I'd encountered before. It was truly immense, stretching far beyond the horizon, far higher than the intense blue of the sky, far deeper than the sand and rock beneath our feet. We celebrated Holy Communion on the summit of Mount Sinai itself, having it to ourselves, and then a couple of days later, thanks to Mohammed, our wonderful guide, we found a place out of the way where we could just sit on the ground together and add our own silence to the larger one surrounding us. The evening before that, I sat up in bed and wrote, "God treads softly here." Not the whole book, you understand, but this poem that lends it its title. It draws not only on the Bible, but on some of the birds we'd seen on the pilgrimage. I'm passionate about bird watching. We'd seen a large flock of spiraling white storks, the local Sinai rosefinch, and a tiny warbler I'd held in my hands as I released it from our hotel one morning during breakfast. It had got trapped and was flying up against the window. When the time came for our corporate silence, I dared to break into the middle of it with the lines I'd written. I apologize in advance to my Quaker friends who are with us. It's too long to drop into the silence of Quaker worship. But I'm still an Anglican. Sort of Quanglican. And for Anglicans who love lots of words, it's really very short. No time this time for any biblical quotation. God treads softly here. God treads softly here. You do not hear her coming. She does not mark her sacred home with noise of thunder, earthquake, trumpet blast. On top of ancient Sinai, her silence rests upon the world, her words half whispered in a silken breeze. And when she passes all her glory by, we see her cloud of wheeling birds and catch her ease and grace slipping on the desert air. We see her wings white shining in the sun and watch her weaving patterns in the sky, but yet there is no call, no cry, no beat of wing to break the silence of the place. God treads softly here. And did she really have so much to say when Moses toiled up there among the sculpted rocks? Did she drown out the local finch and make him blush to strawberry pink for daring to disturb her speech? And did her wisdom cost her reams of words? Or did she whisper in another breeze and only lightly move the air? And was it men who turned such gentleness, such self-effacing, shy disturbances into thunder, quake, and trumpet blast of rampant religion? And did they take the fire that burned without the merest sound in desiccated desert thorn and turn it into fearful blaze? And should we not recall that God treads softly here? God treads softly here. We hear her in the silences, both large and small. We see her in the shadows cast by distant birds upon the surface of the sky. We hold her in our hands and feel not even lightness there. And so we marvel at her great simplicity and wonder why we should now make her all so complicated and confused. The wise men came to Bethlehem by following a thread of silent light that led them to a sleeping child. And though we tried to drown that quiet by hammering the child to twisted wood and pushing thorns into his scalp, yet in the quietness of the dawn, without a sound, without a single movement of the air, he slipped out of death, left his grave clothes on the side, and went to play his whooping games with astonished and familiar angels. Yet though heaven may resound to his eternal play, God still treads softly here. Listen. the word, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I've been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. From my final collection, God in Our Midst, I do not need your grandeur. And God says to David, do not make me in your image, your royal highness. How then could Bedouin shepherds dare bring me angel songs and sing them as my lullaby? How could I take my first faltering steps beneath the thatch in Nazareth, or run among the vines, or dig to find that pearl of great price buried in its fields? How could I sleep in a fisherman's boat, embrace a madman among the tombs? How could I talk to a Samaritan woman out there at the well in the lonely midday sun? Ask Zacchaeus to take me to his home? How could I bend to wash the feet of my friends, or stoop my head to desert thorns, stretch my hands and feet against the Romans' brutal wood? I know what you will do to me in your grand cedar house. You will lock me away and give the key to a high priest. Then he will make me most fearfully homely, dangerous to approach, deadly to the touch, and no longer will I be free to say, reach out and put your hand into the wound upon my side. Extend your finger to my hands, to the holes that pierce them through. And you, the great high king in your fine palace, will have me next to you, a god to wear upon the chest, the pièce de résistance of your royal wardrobe. You will demand prostration of the people, that all must bow themselves before me and put their noses in the dust, when in your heart of hearts you mean them to lick the dirt from off your shoes and run at the click of your finger. If I am not careful, you will ride into Iraq in my name. You wish to call me king, that you may behave like a god of the old school, that god of the ancient imaginations of overweening men. But my ways are not your ways, nor ever will be. I do not need your grandeur. I have a grandeur of my own that reaches far beyond the farthest star. I bear whole galaxies in the hands you pierced. The light and dark of space are held in their entirety within the pupils of my eyes. The universe itself is the smile upon my face. I keep my grandeur in the violet hiding in the shelter of the mountain rock, in the hurtling flight of the falcon, in the purity of the nightingale's quivering throat, and the cry of the gull against the sea's dark roar, in the softness of a baby's skin, in the shuffling of the old man bearing the tea tray for his wife as act of unassuming love, and in the strong grip of the hand of the dying. Do not hide me away, nor try to pin me down, fix me as a butterfly inside your case, for others to admire and think you clever to have captured me. Do not turn the play, the dance of my parables, into the millstone of your doctrine. I do not want to hang about another's neck, for their disbelief of what you demand of them is true, be hurled with them into the sea. I cannot be defined, delineated, described, however learned you may be. I will not play your power games, nor be accessory to your so high authority. I will not be your prisoner. I will have my freedom. You will not domesticate me, nor make me predictable. I will come and go as I please, and if I choose to wash your feet, then it is not because I am at your beck and call, but because I love you, and because your feet are sore from all your many journeyings. A tent is good enough for me, for I can pack it up and travel with you, so you can find me where you are, or else follow in my tracks. I have a kingdom, David, very different from your own. For that a tent will do. For I can sit outside and ask you share with me a glass of tea. And we can tell our stories through the night and turn it all to day. And that, my friend, will be all the grandeur we need. I've long thought that Bach should be canonized. After all, the church throughout the centuries has canonized rafts of dreary theologians, but none of them can hold a candle to J.S. Bach, can they? And there's a few more I'd add to that. And so we come full circle. We're back in heaven. As I was writing this story for a Sunday service in the cathedral back in the late 90s, I had this voice sounding in my head. And I'm afraid after all these years it's still there, as you're about to hear. One of my memories of that occasion is a prison chaplain coming up to me afterwards and asking me if she could use it in her work. Of course I said, of course she could. I don't know whether she did, but I handed her my copy. And it needs just these few words from Matthew 20 as introduction. And Jesus said, so the last will be first. The hands of God. The streets of the heavenly city were strangely empty. I hadn't exactly hoped to find God waiting for me at the gates. In fact, I hadn't expected to be there at all, and meeting God was not something I'd been on the edge of my coffin for. I hadn't lived a good life, been in and out of prison, never had any time for God, and didn't want to start then. Now, I died too much of a sudden as well. I hadn't died what you religious people call a good death. Too much pain and too much anger. I'd still been all bitter and scared stiff too when the final breath came, though the stiff bit came later now I come to think about it. They hadn't found me for 3 days. Nobody had come to my funeral. I'd lost contact with my family years before. None of them knew where I lived, and I didn't know how many of them were alive or dead. I had no friends either. I was never very good at making friends, at worse and worse at keeping them. I'd always made a mess of things. My last years I've been all on my own. One of the undertaker people had sat in on the funeral, and someone from the social services had turned up. And the vicar had done a good job considering, but he hadn't seemed too sure of himself when he got onto the subject of my prospects with the Almighty. They'd hoped a neighbour might come, but I'd kept myself too much to myself, hadn't I, and been too much of a nuisance the rest of the time. I thought it was all because I was abused as a child, but I didn't expect God to agree with that. After all, he knows just how bad we really are, doesn't he? My old dad taught me that when I was a kid, when he got his strap out. And my mum said the same when she did those other things with me. I was a bad boy, they said, a bad, bad boy. I believed them, of course. Well, you do, don't you? I never gave up believing them. I died still believing them. And that was why I was more than a bit surprised not to find myself in the other place, down among the teeth gnashers. After all, I deserved it. But there I was in heaven, in the old heavenly city, inside the gates, only there weren't any gates, pearly ones or otherwise. That was a surprise as well. No gates. Nowhere to put any gates. No walls, see? Nothing to keep people out. It was also quiet and no one around. So I thought I'd go for a wander. Felt all right to do that. No notices to say you couldn't anyway. Oh, it was a sight better than the place where I'd lived, I tell you. It was like coming home, it was. At least like coming to the home I'd always dreamt of as a kid, and not just as a kid either. That's the sort of home you read about in books, only I'd never read about one like this. And it was my home. And God's, of course, our home. Me and him and lots of others, presumably, because if I was there, I couldn't think who wasn't. So where was everyone? All very quiet. Until I found it down a side street. God's house. Now that was a disappointment, at least at first. If you'd asked me what God's house was like, I'd have said it must be enormous and really grand and gold all over, with windows too high up to see into, and flights of tall steps and angels guarding the doors, huge doors banged up shut and too heavy for anyone ordinary to open, so the angels would have to open them for you, only they'd only do that if you'd been very good all your life, and I hadn't. So that was that as far as I was concerned, and anyway the place was far too posh and too frightening and all, if I was honest, which I rarely was. But this wasn't like that at all. It was small and ordinary, and the windows were low down, and the door was open, and there were angels inside, with one of them playing jazz on a piano with the front off. And a load of people having the best time of their lives by the sound of it, and I didn't know if they'd let me in, when one of the angels came out and brought me inside, and I stood there inside the door feeling a bit of a lemon. My angel had disappeared into the kitchen, and I couldn't see God anywhere, and I was just going about to go out back out again when she came out to see me. Just to see me. Deliberately. My God was in the middle of making bread and was up to her elbows in flour, and she came out on purpose at a tricky stage of the operations just to see me. I didn't know God wore a penny. And all of a sudden I remembered my mum, and I nearly turned and ran, but she came right up to me and gave me a great big hug. Like no hug I'd ever had before. I mean, it was for me, not just for her. And then she went back to her baking. And that was my judgment day. I've never been the same since, of course. I'm getting quite good at the jazz and the baking with God. And I still have the marks of God's flowery hands on my back. Everyone does up here. Wow. Well, we can't follow that, can we? But I've got some little things to give you. They are very little things. One for you, Lionel. Yeah, don't worry. And one for you, Brian. Thank you so much. That's very kind. It's wonderful. I knew what music they'd chosen, but I didn't realize until it came to this evening how brilliantly those pieces would fit with my pieces. So brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, I think, Rick, this being the last of the series of 4 we've had since the middle of last December, Rick wants to say something before you go to the centre, if you wish, to perhaps buy some books and have a coffee or tea and some biscuits.
The number of books you buy are somehow related to the possibility of us ever doing this again. I'm not supposed to. I don't think it's pay to play, but something quite no. There are lots of books and things to have a look through and see what might inspire and delight you this autumn and through the rest of the year. So my gratitude again to those who've been able to be here, both with us in person and those who have endured some of the technical interference online, but we found our way eventually. And thank you very, very much indeed. God bless you.
Thank you. Can I just add this, because I don't think Rick knew this, but the booksellers have come all the way from Hanley, near Stoke-on-Trent, from the Methodist Book Centre, and I've known them in the past, Julianne and her sister Karen, and they're brilliant and lovely, and they've promised to give 10% of their profits to Christian Aid. So there we go.